What up? I'm B and welcome to my channel where we talk about all things true crime and current events. Today I've got a little bit of a bonus surprise for you guys because we're going to be doing a crafty crimes video. That is where you and I sit down together, we talk about something related to the true crime world, and we do a little crocheting at the same time. And if you've been subscribed to my channel for a while, you probably remember me doing these on a weekly basis, and there's a small minority of people who really love them, but they don't appeal to the majority of my audience, and it wasn't what most people who watched me wanted to see. So I decided to pull back to create more content that appealed to the majority of the people who are watching me. So I haven't done one of these for about a month and a half, 2 months now, and over the past few weeks I've gotten a few comments from several of you saying, I hope we get to see a new crafty crime soon, I hope you bring them back sometime, I'd love to see another one, and because I appreciate you and your support, I decided to go ahead and bring it back, and I think I'll be doing this every so often. I'm not going to make any guarantees or any promises on how often I will be doing crafty crimes. I think it just kind of depends on what you guys want and what I hear from you. For now, they're just going to be a bonus surprise every now and then. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. First, I want to tell you about a man named Richard Petrone. He was born on August 29th, 1969, and he lived in eastern Pennsylvania. Richard was just an all-around good dude. Like, he was really close to his family. He came from a really tight-knit Italian family. His parents owned a bakery that he worked at, and he ended up moving into the apartment upstairs, and Richard was just really great at his job. His mom has said that his specialty was like wedding cakes, and it's just one of those things where somebody is so kind of naturally bent to be talented at something that you're like, how is that fair? That's so cool that you are so good at that, just like seemingly. I'm sure he put in a ton of hard work, but it was just like he had this knack for wedding cakes. So works there with his parents, super close to his mom. They would talk every day, multiple times per day, and he was a big family guy, and that applied even when he had his daughter, Angela. So in the 90s, Richard had a daughter with an ex-girlfriend of his. They ended up not staying together, but they did share custody. Richard had their daughter, Angela, throughout the weeks, and then on the weekend she would go with her mom, and that's how it was for years and years and years. And Angela remembers her dad just being so involved. Like, he would stay home, he would hang out with her, he would help her with her homework, make sure she was doing well in school. He would let her come down into the bakery and like play around with different like cookies and decorating them and stuff like that. Like, I don't know how many other ways to say this dude was a good dude, but I'll try one more. So Richard was obsessed with Bruce Springsteen. Loved the guy, knew every one of his songs, loved to sing along, always played the songs when Angela was around, and she said that, you know, he told her, next time Bruce comes to town, I'm taking you. And they ended up going, and they just stayed throughout the entire thing. They sang their hearts out, they had the best time, and she basically said, like, getting to take her to that concert made his life. Like, he was so happy about it. So, Richard, great guy, awesome dude, family oriented, works in the family business, great dad, had a really good circle of friends. That's what we know about him as of now. Now I want to tell you about a woman named Danielle Imbo, or Danielle Imbo. She was born on January 1st, 1971, and she lived in New Jersey. Now, the area of New Jersey that she lived in was super close to Pennsylvania. Like, she lived in Mount Laurel as an adult, so she could go from there to Philly in 30 minutes. Super close. So she lives in New Jersey. She also comes from a super tight-knit Italian family, you know, grew up having Sunday dinner together every week, and even after her father passed away, their family continued on the tradition. She was super close to her mom and her brother, as well as her brother's wife, and you know how you have family that you're close to, and then you have family that has a spare key to your house that they feel comfortable using whenever, even if you're not home? That's how they were. Like, that is how close they were. So Danielle was a singer in a cover band, and they played at different local bars and restaurants. She was the lead singer, and everyone said that she was incredible up on stage. They compared her to Janis Joplin, said she had a real raspy, powerful voice, and her brother John even said, like, when she was up on stage, you could just tell, like, that is where she was meant to be. She was such a natural. Everyone loved to see her, and she was really good at it. But in 2001, she married a man named Joe Imbo. And Joe basically told her, okay, we're married now. It's time for you to be like a real wife, and I don't want you going out to these different bars and clubs every weekend performing. I want you to stay home. And so she quit doing that. And I don't want to say that this dude was like a bad husband, but I think he had a very antiquated view, I guess, of what a woman in a relationship with him was supposed to do. So anyway, they get married in 2001, and then 2 years later, they end up having a son named Joe Jr. And Danielle was smitten immediately with this baby. Her brother said that he and his wife went to go visit Danielle in the hospital when she had Joe Jr., and she looked at him and she was just crying, and she was like, now I know what it is truly like to be in love with someone. She loved this kid. And for a little bit, it seemed like, you know, she was in this blissful state, married, had her kid. You know, you're starting a new family is a really cool thing, but that didn't last long, and within a few months, their marriage had pretty much fallen apart. You see, in 2004, Joe had tickets to go to the Super Bowl, and at the time that he was supposed to go, both Danielle and his son, Joe Jr., they were both pretty sick. And so, I mean, people have made kind of a big deal about this, about him leaving his wife and kid at home to go to the Super Bowl when they were sick. And I feel like a Super Bowl is a pretty big deal. Like, you know, I don't think that that's the worst thing in the world to leave them to go. But here is what's potentially one of the worst things you could do to somebody ever. Joe goes to the Super Bowl, leaves Danielle and Joe Jr. behind, and when he comes back, he announces that he met someone while he was on his trip. He no longer loves Danielle, he does not want to be with her anymore, and he wants a divorce so he can go be with this woman. So that's devastating, essentially, to Danielle. It wrecks her life, which how could it not? So they separate, and Danielle just starts going through a really tough time, which is really truly to be expected. But it wasn't just like emotionally, it was really hard for her. It started manifesting really physically too, and so she lost a ton of weight. She was constantly crying. She was constantly calling her brother's wife, just weeping about how hard of a time she was having. She started chain smoking all the time. Like, I think she was a smoker before, but this was just constant now. And at the time, Danielle worked for a loan company as a mortgage processor, so they were able to set her up to work from home so that way she could stay home and take care of her son. Danielle and Joe were splitting custody at the time as they were working towards getting their divorce finalized and setting all that up. So that was good at least, but most of the things going on in her life were really tough. Now, Danielle has a friend named Christine Petrone, who happens to be the sister of Richard Petrone. And Christine and Danielle have known each other for years, since they were 15. And so at this point in 2004, it's been about 20 years. They're both in their mid-30s, and they've been close this entire time. And, you know, over the course of those years, their families have gotten close, their moms are friends, they hang out, they call each other, and Danielle and Richard have obviously known each other, and they've been friendly, but they've never had any sort of romantic relationship. However, at this point, something gets sparked, something clicks, and they realize that, hey, maybe we do like each other like that, and they start dating. And it was really cool for them. It was just a comfortable, happy, fun relationship. Richard had spent a lot of time at home. You know, he had a really solid group of friends, but he wasn't really dating too many people, getting serious with anybody. He was spending a lot of time at home raising his daughter. And so his family was like, this is really cool. It's really nice to see him have someone, you know, somebody to be with, confide in, to have that closeness with. And so his family was like, yes, we love this. And as for Danielle, her family was really happy that they'd gotten together too. You know, they'd known Richard for nearly 20 years, and they saw that he made Danielle happy. She seemed like she was kind of finally starting to be able to process everything that was happening with Joe and move on. You know, they made a really good pairing. But didn't last very long. You know, she was still working through the divorce and kind of trying to figure out what her new normal was supposed to look like. And it didn't help that pretty quickly after leaving her, Joe comes back and is like, I made a mistake. Like, his relationship with the woman that he met on his trip to the Super Bowl, it fell apart almost instantly, which of course it did. And so he comes back and is trying to tell Danielle, oh, like, I want to be with you, I love you, blah, 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 you know, like, you know, the typical stuff. But Danielle wasn't super eager to take him back. I think there's always part of a person in that kind of situation who wants things to kind of like go back to how they were before your life got blown apart. But she was definitely super cautious. And I think something that made her even more cautious was one time when she said no, Joe got so mad he picked up their son's high chair and threw it against the wall. However, he to this day says he doesn't remember doing that, but that's beside the point. The point is that Danielle had so much going on mentally that she just needed to be by herself for a little bit. So she told Joe, no, like, I can't do this right now, I need some time. She told Richard, hey, we gotta separate a little bit. I need some space. I want to figure out what life is gonna look like for me going forward. And Richard totally understood and he backed off. However, this break only lasted about 5 weeks. And on February 19th, 2005, Richard was heading out to a bar with 2 of his friends. And he ended up calling his sister Christine and seeing if she wanted to go hang out with them. Christine happened to be out with her mom, Danielle, and Danielle's mom. And Christine wasn't really in the mood to go out to a bar. It was super cold. It was like 27 degrees out that night. She wasn't interested, but she was like, hey, maybe Danielle will want to go. Let me just ask her. And she extended the invitation, and Danielle decided, why not? She accepted and went to meet Richard. Danielle, Richard, and Richard's 2 friends all end up going to South Street in Philly to see a band play at a club. And South Street is just kind of, it's a street that has a lot of different bars, restaurants, clubs, like little local shops. It's very popular for tourists, and it's kind of a situation where there's not a ton of parking. Like, it's not like a standalone building. You have to sometimes park a little bit further away, or they'll have lots that are outside of South Street and then you can walk up into it. So they go there, and Richard was psyched because he ended up getting a spot that was really close, and it was super cold out, so he's like, yes, we don't have to walk too far, this is awesome. So they all get there, they go to the club, have a great time. Richard and Danielle are just really enjoying being back together. Like, they weren't super serious. They'd only dated kind of on and off for a few months before that, but I think they really had a lot of care for each other, and they really had a good time together. So they've got their arms around each other, they're holding hands, cuddling, laughing, literally just having a great time. And on top of everything, Danielle was getting along really well with Richard's friends too. So they have a great time, they're watching this band, and when the set is over, Richard's friends say that they're going to go ahead to a different bar to watch another band play. And they invited Richard and Danielle to go along with them, but they both had to, switch off for custody the following day. So they're like, it's 11:45, we should probably head out. Richard was going to take Danielle home, and potentially spend the night, maybe not. We'll see how it goes. So they say their goodbyes. Richard's friend Anthony gives him a big hug, says, "Hey, I love you, man," and the couples go their separate ways. And that was the last time anyone saw Richard Petrone or Danielle Imbo ever again. So let me tell you what happens after this. Next morning at 9 a.m., John, Danielle's brother, is at her condo in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. He's knocking, she's not answering. He's over there because Joe Jr. had torn down a curtain rod and John was going over to fix it. No answer, nothing. He's like, this is kind of odd, and decides to call their mom. Their mom is like, oh, I think I know where she might be. You know, she went out with Richard, explains the whole thing. And so she's like, Danielle probably slept over at Richard's house. No big deal. I'm sure she'll be home soon. So John's like, okay, you know, if that's where she's at, that's where she's at, but I'm still going to go in. I'm going to fix it and head out. He had a spare key. And so he enters her condo, notices that, you know, she definitely hasn't been there this morning. The bed is made, there's no dishes in the sink, everything looks clean, and on top of everything else, the ashtrays were empty, which was super odd considering how often she was smoking at the time. So he's like, all right, yeah, she definitely hasn't been here, she's probably with Richard. He fixed the curtain rod, and he leaves. Now at 11 a.m., Danielle is supposed to have a hair appointment at the salon where her friend Christine works, and she doesn't show, which is super odd. Danielle's not a flaky person at all, so it's really not like her to be late for something without calling, and it's especially not like her to just not show up at all without anybody hearing anything from her. So Christine tries calling Danielle, and there's no answer. Now at the same time, at this point in the day, Richard's mom has tried calling him several times. Like I said, they were super close. They talked on the phone multiple times per day, and she knew that he was supposed to be home because he was going to be having some friends over. They were going to watch NASCAR together, drink beer, hang out, whatever. And so she's like, the only time he doesn't answer the phone is if he's with Angela and they're like having one-on-one time, and I know that they're not. Like, he's not spending quality time with his daughter. He's supposed to just be hanging out. He would answer. This is really weird. And so after a few hours, she starts to get concerned, and she asks her sister to head over to Richard's apartment above the family bakery, just to see if he's home, see what's up, why aren't you answering your phone, all that kind of stuff. And when his aunt goes over there, Richard's not home. So hearing this, Richard's mom calls Danielle's mom. They start talking about, hey, haven't been able to get a hold of any of them. Where are they? Have you heard anything? Has anyone else heard anything? Like, something is seriously up with this. And kind of the final straw happened at around 5 p.m. that night, because that's when the kind of switch off was supposed to happen between Joe and Danielle with their son, Joe Jr. And so, like, Danielle would not have missed that if she had a say in the matter. She wouldn't just not be home when her son was getting dropped off, you know? So Danielle's brother and mom are at her place, kind of just waiting around, seeing what's happening, and when Joe comes to drop Joe Jr. off, he's like, where's Danielle? And at this point, John, Danielle's brother, doesn't say anything about her like being missing and not being able to get a hold of her, because he's concerned that Joe might be able to use this in a custody battle. And he's just like, she's out with Christine. She asked me to be here. She'll be home soon. And they send Joe on his way. And like I said, this is when both families knew that Danielle and Richard were not okay. Something was for real wrong. So they call the police, and they also start kind of doing their own sort of searches. They're calling different precincts, they're calling different hospitals, and Danielle's brother and Richard's dad get in a car and just start driving around, start seeing what's up. And here's the thing about like the areas that they were in the night before is Danielle lives in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. They were at South Street in Philadelphia. That's separated by the Delaware River, right in that area. And so there are 4 different bridges that they possibly could have taken that would have been like a viable option to get to South Street. And so they're going across them, trying to figure out, you know, maybe they took a turn here, maybe they got confused here. And they end up driving around for 13 hours looking for Danielle and Richard, but there's nothing. The police have not heard anything. They're not in any hospitals anywhere. No one's even seen the truck since before they left the club that they were at, which is called Abilene's. Nothing. The police are doing what they can. It's both the Philadelphia and Mount Laurel police departments looking into this. They're looking at phone records, their easy passes, their bank accounts, nothing. And both of their phones are off. I don't think I told you this. They're calling them, like they're calling Danielle and Richard, their family members are, and their phones are off. There's nothing. And so both the police departments got together and they were like, hey, we got to call the FBI and see if we can get some help on this and get their phone records to see what's up. Because they've not used their bank accounts. They're not using their easy passes. You know, we literally have nothing. And on top of that, like, it's one thing to make two people disappear, but how do you make a truck disappear? It is Richard drove a Dodge Dakota, a big black truck. No one has seen it since that night in February. And so they start trying to see if they can like look at cameras. And they did have some cameras on South Street, but none of them caught Richard and Danielle leaving the club. There were cameras on the bridges going into Philadelphia, but not on the way going out, which is where they should have been going. So even if they did cross the bridges, there would be no way of knowing. And none of the tolls that they would have taken had cameras. So they've got no leads. They've got no idea where to start, who to look at, where to even go with this, and the police are just kind of doing the best they can trying to find these people. After a few weeks of getting nowhere, the police start to kind of expand their search and consider different possibilities. And one of the possibilities they start considering is that maybe this was part of an organized crime ring. It sounds crazy. You know, they're just like family guys. They're family guys and gals. They don't really have anything crazy going on in their lives, so how would they be involved in this? But it turns out that there's a pretty big chop shop ring in Philly, and so, you know, people will steal these cars, they'll take them back to their shops, strip them down, and sell them for parts. And so the police think maybe that's what happened. Maybe somehow they got ambushed, they got jacked, like, and they took the car and stripped it down. So the police explore this option, but ultimately find no evidence of this. And when you really kind of break it down and think about it, like, this crime was essentially committed perfectly. No one saw them, no one heard them, no one heard any commotion. It was clean, it was perfectly done. I mean, it's a viable theory, but there's just never been anything that has occurred or that they've been able to find that says, yes, this is for sure what happens. So it's kind of open-ended at this point. And at the same time, the family is made aware that there's a part on one of the bridges between Philly and New Jersey that has a part that's like part of the guardrail has been broken off. And so they're thinking, okay, well, maybe they got confused, they got on the wrong bridge, you know, maybe they had, you know, one too many drinks and ended up driving off this bridge. So they were able to get a dive team to go in and they searched the river. Turns out there's a ton of cars down there, but none of them are Richard's truck. So that's another dead end. One of the more heartbreaking possibilities of what could have happened, it involves Danielle's brother. A few weeks after their disappearance, someone had called John's mother-in-law and told the mother-in-law that Danielle was in a boxcar somewhere dying and that they had to go find her to save her life. And so John admits, he's like, you know, obviously this is insane, this is wild, like, this doesn't make any sense, and I know I have no reason to believe it, but that's my sister, and if somebody tells me she's in a boxcar somewhere, I'm gonna go find that boxcar. So he calls the police, lets them know where he's going. They're like, don't do this, you can't go there. And he's like, well, I gotta. And so he goes to this rail yard, starts looking through these boxcars, and he's only there for a little bit until the police show up. They escort him off the property, and he didn't find anything while he was there. There was no evidence to make it look like this was an actual legitimate tip, and we've got another dead end. So up until this point, both families had been working together and kind of coordinating on different search efforts, going out, putting up flyers, putting up posters together, all this stuff. Like, they'd really kind of come together in this time and done what they could as a joint effort. But they are heartbroken, they're desperate, they're anxious to understand what happened to these two people who they love so much, and because the emotions are kind of high, they end up turning on each other a little bit. It kind of started when John took to asking Richard's parents a little bit more about him, saying, well, I've known this guy for a while, but do I really know him? What's Richard into? Was he doing anything sketchy? Is there a reason that somebody would have targeted him and taken my sister as collateral? Is he into something underground, illegal, some sort of crime ring, and you guys are hiding it? Like, he's basically just going in on the parents, and it's wrong. Like, he shouldn't have done that to them, but you can understand where he's coming from, just out of this desperation of wanting to know where his sister is and not leaving any stone unturned. So after this, Richard's parents are super offended. They're pissed off that John would even come around asking that kind of thing, and they say, well, what about Danielle? What about her ex-husband Joe? Maybe he had something to do with this, because Joe was violent sometimes. Joe was pretty angry. Joe had called Richard several times and kind of gone off on him, saying, leave Danielle alone, she's mine, we're getting back together, we're a family, she's my wife, don't talk to her. And additionally, Joe had been kind of like creeping on Danielle a little bit. He like broke into her voicemail box and listened to her messages, and so he's just kind of a sketchy character in all of this. But luckily, the police did kind of rule him out. They interviewed him. He has a solid alibi. He was like 50 miles away at a family function with multiple people seeing him there and vouching for him. He does have family members on the police force, but the police have said, we don't believe that it's him. Like, no one's officially ruled out, but he's not a suspect. So despite all this, both families have their feelings hurt. Which, of course, but they don't want to get over it. They're mad at each other. They're no longer working together. They say, you know what, you came for the integrity of my son. You're trying to blame this on my daughter. We're done. And they essentially separate. And I think one of the worst parts about this is the police even took that angle. They were like, well, were they into anything sketchy? Like, they just randomly disappeared. The truck is gone. Like, their phones have been off since that day. No one's touched their money, nothing. This doesn't seem right. Maybe one of them was into something. And they looked and they asked around and they talked to different informants and nothing. So the police were like, it wasn't any of their faults. Like, we don't think that either of them were the target of anything going on. It was probably just a random pick. But the damage has been done. The families are not patching things up anytime soon. So the disappearances happened in 2005, and since then there have been tons of different searches. Once the snow melted in 2005, they went and searched the Pine Barrens. They've held vigils outside of the bar that they were at that night. They've posted so many flyers, put up billboards, so many different things both of these families have done to try and bring Danielle and Richard home, or at least figure out what happened to them. But as I said, there's literally been nothing. A few different things and different theories have come about in the years since their disappearance, and one of them happened about 3 years after. There was a pickup truck in the bottom of a river, and the police had found it because they were looking at something unrelated to Danielle and Richard's case, but the police were like, it's a black pickup. Richard used to drive a black pickup. Maybe there's something similar, and the news was coming to watch them dredge up this truck for some reason, so the lead detective ended up calling both families and just letting them know, hey, this might be happening, like, I want you to hear it from me. It's potential that it could be Richard's truck, but we don't know. We're pulling it up. I'll keep you updated. And it took 4 hours to pull the truck up, but it ended up not being Richard's truck. The license plate didn't match, and neither did the VIN number. And then about 7 years after that, the police still hadn't given up searching for them. Obviously it wasn't like a daily thing that they were putting time into, but the case really just baffled the police department, and so for the 10-year kind of anniversary of them going missing, they decided to pull in some new detectives, you know, see if they could find anything or give any new insight, shed some light on what potentially could have happened. And at this point, they did announce that they believed that Richard and Danielle were victims of a murder for hire plot, but they weren't at liberty to say why, and they haven't made any arrests, and there's been no further information about this. There was some talk in a court case about how there was kind of like a pill fiend. There's a guy in the like pharmaceutical underground circle, and he committed suicide in jail. He left a note about 2 people that he was hired to murder, but there wasn't any solid evidence that it was Danielle and Richard. Like, it was just kind of like, oh, well, maybe that fits, and I don't think it does. It's been 5 years since then, and there's still nothing. So we're just as confused as we ever were. To this day, Danielle and Richard's families still do not talk. Neither Danielle nor Richard's phones have ever been turned back on. Their bank accounts were never touched again, and the truck, as well as these 2 loving parents, adored children, and celebrated friends, remain missing. It appears that there are a million different things that could have happened to Richard and Danielle. I think one of the most likely things is potentially that somebody broke into Richard's truck and was waiting for them. I don't know the motive why. The police couldn't find anybody in either of their families who wanted to hurt them or like had any idea of, oh, like he had a problem with this person, he owed money to this person, she had scorned this person. Like, nothing. They couldn't find anything. And so I think it was probably just like a random act of violence. Potentially somebody hiding in the back of Richard's truck, waiting until they got in, and then putting a gun up to one of their heads and forcing them to drive to do whatever it was that they were trying to get them to do. I will say, not to make light of any of this whatsoever, but part of my brain went to, what if this was like an alien abduction? Or like, what if, you know how they say that there are like parallel universes and that kind of explains the Mandela effect? You know, we have these timelines where sometimes we shift in between them, and so a lot of the things are similar, but different, and we don't know that we've shifted, and so we'll remember it being Berenstain Bears, but nope, it's always been Berenstain Bears, and stuff like that. And so I'm like, what if somehow they shifted into a different timeline? But I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I'd love to hear your theories. If you've heard anything else from any other sources, any other guesses on what could have happened, and your thoughts on the case in general, just go ahead and leave them in the comment section below. And while you are doing that, if you would consider liking this video, subscribing to my channel, or joining my membership, that would be awesome. And if you have subscribed or joined already, thank you so much. I love being able to just sit here, hang out with you, and talk about whatever. And with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Thank you so much for watching. Please be kind to people, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.